algorithms out there, and so these are kind of the common ones. They're not very strong, obviously, since they're going to require you guys to break them. But just know that there's a bunch of other ones. We're definitely not going to go into those. So if you're interested, do some research, Google it. So the ones we're going to cover is Caesar shift cipher. There's also the ROT1, ROT5, and ROT13. They're all just variations of the Caesar shift cipher, but they do get referred to independently sometimes. Okay. And then we're also going to look at transposition ciphers and the Vignère cipher. Okay, so Caesar shift cipher. This one, pretty straightforward, right? All you're doing is you're taking the normal alphabet, sequence, and you're shifting the letters by, whatever X number of units you want it to do. So that's kind of where we're going to the ROT1, ROT5, and ROT13. The numbers indicate the fixed shift that they're using, right? So you're going to shift 1 for ROT1, shift 5 for ROT5, and shift 13 for ROT13. Okay? But it's a very simple cipher, which is kind of why it's used as a sub-component to a lot of the more complex ciphers, namely the Vignère cipher, which we'll see in a little bit. It's also referred to as a monoalphabetic substitution cipher, right? And we'll see why that's a little important. I threw up the mathematical equation for this cipher if you guys are interested. Only reason I did it this time is because you could probably script this, right? And so if you wanted to do like a brute force against it, because you don't really know what the shift is, right? They're going to give you something and you can try and guess at it. It's a little easier if they leave the white spaces in there, right? Because then you kind of pick out like, oh, that should be like an A or an I, right? You can kind of shift it that way. If they don't, it's going to be a little more complex. But it's just time consuming is what it really is. I think one of the bookmarks that are in the resource folder, that's what they do, is they just try all 26 combinations and you just kind of visually scan the list of the output and you'll see the one that actually decrypted, right? But if you want to do it on your own, you can use those equations to write a script to do it for you. All right. Any questions on this one? Mark? Okay, so just here's the ROT1, 5, and 13, just an example. So as you can see, right, so ROT1, they just shifted it by one character and the A gets thrown at the back end. So if you wanted to encrypt the A, it'd become a B, so on and so forth. So 13 is basically half the alphabet, you're just slowing around the backside. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, so how do we start attacking the encryption? So frequency analysis is probably your first bet. What that entails is that the English language generally has a standard distribution of frequency of letters, right? So you have your ones that are more common, so your E's, your T's, your A's, your O's. In that actual order is your most common letters, right? So if you were to kind of plot that on a graph as far as probability-wise, it kind of looks like that, right? So there's some online tools that will do frequency analysis on the text that you give it. What you're looking for is that basic kind of pattern, but slightly shifted, right? That'll tell you how much shift you got. Downside to frequency analysis, it needs, the more cipher text you feed it, the more accurate it is, right? Because you're not changing the amount of letters, you're just changing what letter represents another letter, right? So the frequency should be the same. So if you see a spike on, N, that could be indicative that your N's were actually E's, right? And it's kind of how you break that down. But it'll give you at least a kind of a hint as to, is this just a simple substitution, right, where they just swap letters around? Kind of helps you pinpoint that. If the text is short, just know that it's not going to be as accurate. It's still useful, but not as accurate. What you don't want to see is that bar chart looks just flat all across the board, right? Those are kind of the fingerprints of more complex ciphers, where the whole goal is to flatten out this distribution to make it harder for you guys to find. Okay? You guys can read these slides later on, but kind of just keep these in the back of your head, right? So the ways you can pick stuff out in the ciphertext is look for the ones that are the most common, the least common, right? And then there's the same, you can go with the letter pairs, right? So TH is the most common, ER, ON, AN, and then these are the ones that are kind of the least likely to be, right?
Sorry, dumb question. Where would the tool be to do frequency analysis?
I believe there's one on the resource.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be. I can't remember what the exact site is.
Or we could Google it.
Yeah, and most of the stuff that I've got on the slides are all from Wikipedia, so they usually have links to other tools and stuff.
And I have a question. How do you know the spikes of the frequencies? How do you know, like, for example, the N is an E, or the substitute as an E?
So I know one of the sites that are on there, the frequency analysis tool, right? So it's going to actually put in your ciphertext, right? And what it's going to do is it's going to pop out a frequency distribution, and it's going to put it side by side with the standard normal distribution, right? So you can kind of see that if your ciphertext had a spike, you know, it had the most N's, right? Was the example. It's not 100% accurate, but you can kind of guess that, hey, maybe that N was supposed to be an E, right? And if you count that number of letters, that's your shift, right? So now you kind of know what Caesar shift to try. Again, not going to be 100% accurate because they're not usually going to give you enough ciphertext to make it super accurate. But it gives you a place to start, right? One tip that, you know, when we did Cipher Olympics that we struggled with, and we'll see it later with the Vignère cipher, the ciphertext had you know, one of the words was like 3 Z's in a row, right? There's no English word that has 3 characters in a row, right? So immediately we should have known that that's not a substitution cipher. You know, we did it. We spent like, you know, 30, 40 minutes on this trying to figure it out, but stuff like that. So keep that in mind, right? So if you start looking at, even in the ciphertext, right, you should be able to kind of see, you know, in your head, is this possibly even an English word, right? You may see letter combinations that just aren't possible.
And Scott, I think kind of what you're referring to is like the baseline. So the baseline that's up there compares it like from the English language, right? I guess.
Yeah, this is profiling the English language.
So that's like the baseline that it uses, and you compare your encrypted text, your ciphertext to this, so you can kind of see what the shift is at, the substitution.
So, you know, if you were dealing with Spanish, that distribution would look different, right? So this one in particular is for the English language. All right. Any other questions on this? It's a transposition cipher. This one's a little more complex. I don't know that we saw this, but just in case. So this one, kind of uses the position of the letter, right, and usually some sort of a pattern to kind of encrypt the message. Right. So in this case, they broke up. So this is your plain text, right? They broke it up across 3 lines, and what they did was they did a little pattern, right, with the words. That's how they wrote it out. But then when they read the encryption, they went line by line, right? So it basically scrambles the letters. Other ways they'll do it is they'll do it into kind of like a matrix here, right, where they kind of wrote it down in columns, right? And they could do any number of different ways. Looks like for this one they went in a circle this way. What they did. Right? So they did it a spiral. They can do any number of patterns, but it's just basically meant to scramble the letters, right? This one's going to be a little harder. If you guys see something like this, it's pretty hard to figure that one out. So, but you know, if you try all the other ones, just want to keep in mind. I found some stuff on how to tackle this one. So frequency analysis will still kind of work, right? Because you're not you're swapping letter for letter. You're not really changing letters out with different letters that, you know, would mess that distribution up. So you can still see that it's still, you know, not something like a Vignère cipher, which we'll see next, right? So you can kind of eliminate some of the encryption algorithms based on the frequency analysis. But really, anagramming is kind of the way that most people will try and break a transposition cipher. What they'll do is they'll start. Let me try to get this right. So they'll start sliding around pieces where they'll do like pairs, right? And if you start sliding that around and assuming that that's going to kind of pair up certain pieces of the ciphertext, you'll start seeing patterns, right? And it's a lot of guesswork, right? So you're going to come up with this pattern. It's going to look like maybe that could be, you know, a word, and you're going to kind of have to guess it and then do a guess and check kind of thing. I would say definitely for this, it's a pretty complex explanation as to how anagramming actually works. I would highly recommend you guys go and check out the Wikipedia. They have a bunch of other sites. I think, I'm pretty sure in your resource guide, I did find a specific article written by, I think it was a college guy, where he broke it down pretty simply how anagramming works and how you actually do it. But it's, you know, 2-3 pages worth, so I don't want to try and explain this in detail for you guys right now. I suspect you guys would probably not see transposition ciphers just because it takes a long time to break. Okay, so maybe it's not in the research, but it's actually this link here. Those are the slides. Alright, so then we'll talk about the Vignère cipher. So this was one of the ones that we saw in the Cyber Olympics, and it was the one that we didn't break. We can figure out what it was. But it's a little more complex, and the way it works is, again, it uses the Caesar shift cipher, right? So similar to the first one we saw, but what it does is it uses a keyword, right? So if your keyword is, key, what it'll do is it'll match key, and it'll just keep repeating the word key, right, all along. What it does is that the K in the key indicates the cipher, the Caesar shift they're going to use for that particular letter in the plain text, right? So you're basically changing the cipher for every single letter in your plain text to come up with your cipher text, which makes it extremely difficult to figure out what that is, because if you don't know the password, you're left with just brute forcing this thing, which you can do. I mean, people have done that as well. So let's see if I have so here's the example, right? So if the plain text was my secret, and again our keyword is key, right? You see how they just kind of keep repeating it, right under there. Well, that K equates to a shift of 10, right? So for that particular letter, they're using a Caesar shift of 10, which translates to a W, right? And then key or E translates to a shift of 4, which will end up being a C, and so you kind of get it, right? Anybody have questions on how this works?
Oh, yeah. How do you? Using the puzzle right in front of it, how do you translate that?
This thing?
Yeah.
So this would, the way I see it is, this is your plain text letter, right? And then this is your cipher text letter, right? And then we just kind of figure out what that's going to be.
Okay, so it's a M and
so if it's your M, then and your cipher key is K, right? All across it's a W. That's like W. Everybody good on how this works? It's pretty intense. I don't think you saw it on the sample ones, right? So we saw this at Cyber Olympics. I don't know that they will make you do this in your guys' competition, but just in case you see weird things that you can't explain. So how do we break this thing? A lot of it depends on guessing. So I think the way that the people that did solve it in Cyber Olympics, the way they did it was they figured out there was a Vignère cipher, and they just did a brute force against it. Right? They just went through every combination. Mathematically, the way that they usually try and break this is, that keyword is a fixed length, right? So whether it be 3, 4 characters, 5 characters, whatever it is, they try to look for frequency of letters, right? And so if you can guess the key length, right? If you take the first letter of each of those segments, you can do a regular frequency analysis against that, right? And figure out what that, because what you've just done now is you've broken it down to a single Caesar cipher, right? Which that is breakable. It highly depends on you guessing the correct key length. So, but as far as how they do, breaking out this column, they kind of look for repeated characters, right? So in the example of key being the keyword, every third letter is going to be encrypted with that same Caesar cipher, right? So if you then assume that somewhere in the plain text that same thing will recur, or you're going to start seeing repeated patterns of letters being encrypted with the exact same cipher type. That's what they're doing the frequency analysis on, and kind of help you figure it out. Very hard, especially with the time constraints you guys are working in. I think that's why for the guys that did solve this, they just did the brute force because it's a lot faster. So that kind of brings us to the automated brute forcing. So for a lot of these things, if you guys want to take it to that next level, you guys can write scripts. All the online tools are good. Just make sure you use them. But for things that are a little more complex, like especially like this Vignère cipher, if you can't find a tool that will do it for you, you could script it, right? If you know that this thing is a Vignère cipher and you know that there's some keyword, and you can kind of guess the key length, you could just do a brute force and write a script and just keep trying it and kick out the output. So just things to keep in mind, things you guys can do. A lot of this stuff you guys can prep ahead of time too if you wanted to, right? Kind of go through that kind of stuff. So that's just an option I'm going to throw to you guys. And then along with that, so if you guys are going to do the brute force method, then what you're usually going to require is some kind of password dictionary. You kind of cut down the amount of tries. If you assume that this thing's going to be a English language word, then there's no point in you trying to put a dictionary together that has all possible letter combinations, because that's going to include things that aren't actual words. So if you cut that down, you can download a bunch of pre-canned English language dictionaries. I would recommend grabbing the most common languages just because you don't really know. I think in the Cyber Olympics challenge, the password was actually Vignère, which if we had an English dictionary, it wouldn't have helped us. So just things to know. Different kinds of dictionaries. There's hybrid dictionaries, right? So you've seen where they replace an E with a 3, right? So that's kind of what your hybrid dictionaries are. Tools like John the Ripper will produce tables like that for you. So that's kind of an in-between, right? And the other possibility is you just try every possible combination for an 8-letter word, right? And that'll encompass everything. But the hybrid dictionary kind of is middle ground, right? I mean, you're not going to have every possible combination. You have ones that are English words and then, kind of variations of it using different substitutions, right? So just keep in mind, if you guys do the brute forcing, having a dictionary pre-computed will make life a lot faster and easier. Because to compute one of these, depending on how long your word is, could take a long time. Last thing to mention about passwords is just be cognizant of the key space you're using, right? So are you just using all letters? Is it just uppercase or lowercase 2, right? Are you including numbers? Are you including your special characters? Right? All those things come into play and it makes your dictionary a lot bigger and it takes a lot longer to generate. So kind of be selective if you guys are going to start producing these. Be selective of what you're trying to generate. All right. Any questions so far? I think this is the last slide. Yeah. So any questions on encryption? It's a little more difficult. At least from what I saw, the challenge files, they're not usually too terribly difficult. A lot of them are just shift ciphers. You just got to figure out what the shift is. Okay. So on the sample files, there's one that say decrypt me. Those are the ones we're going to be working on now.
Dumb question.
Yep.
On these decryption files, notice that each one has 2 groups of characters separated by a colon. Is that
Oh, okay. So the files that have the colon and something after it, when you decrypt the text, that end piece after the colon is going to look garbled. That was the code we had to submit to the scoring system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So as long as the rest of it looks okay, you probably did it right.
So everything, the 2 pieces around the colon,
The front part, it should be a word, and it was colon and then semicolon. Yeah.
okay.
All right.
Yeah.